So the potential for David's sin was a reality because of the condition of his heart, not the location of his dwelling. See, what's in your heart will eventually be demonstrated in your life. It's in 2 Samuel chapter number 11, verse number 1 that we read about David, the king of Israel. And the chapter starts off like this. It happened in the spring, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the sons of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David stayed in Jerusalem. And that statement has weighed heavy for many people. A lot of people referred to David's decision to stay in Jerusalem as his initial sin, claiming that the Bible makes it clear that he did something wrong. And I don't see evidence for that in Scripture. See, we can't place the sole cause of David's sin on his decision to be in a particular place. I was years and years ago, I was in college and I was looking for a job while I was in college. And so I didn't want to just do a boring job. I wanted to do something that was sometimes boring and then sometimes interesting. And so I worked in a retail store catching shoplifters. I thought that would be a fun job. And 25 years ago, the rules were a lot different than they were today. But I remember this one evening, I'm watching this couple come in, and this woman has a purse, and it's an empty purse, and she starts filling it with all kinds of things. And then her and her boyfriend proceed to try to walk out the door. I calmly approached them and tried to have a conversation. I can't even say that with a straight face. Long story short, we get them back to the office and we start filling out paperwork. And she's crying and she's her hands behind her back and she says to her boyfriend, "See, this is why I don't go shopping with my purse." Now, if you're new today and maybe you don't know me yet, I speak 2 languages. My second language is English. My first language is sarcasm. And I couldn't help myself. And I said, so wait, let me get this straight. You're telling me that the reason that you stole is that you brought your purse and that your purse was empty, and then magically because you had your purse, all these things just flew inside of your purse. And she looked at me dumbfounded, like she never thought about it that way before. But that's kind of what this passage is. There's a lot of people that are like, oh, David sinned because he was at this place at this particular time. And if you're not at that place at that particular time, then you won't sin. That's not true. It's not true just because of common sense, but let me take it a step further. It's not true because of theology. The thought that if David sinned because of where he was, or that someone stole simply because they had a purse, is a flawed sense of our sin nature, and it's a breakdown in our theology. Simply being in the right place does not keep me from sin, nor does it keep me from sinning. Sin often comes from an obvious place of misjudgment, but misjudgment is not the root of sin. The root of sin is our sin nature. It's our origin. If you take me away from everything and you lock me inside a room with nothing around me, there's something in me that still desires to sin. There's something in you that still desires to sin. So the potential for David's sin was a reality because of the condition of his heart, not the location of his dwelling. See, what's in your heart will eventually be demonstrated in your life. And we have this very convenient way of blaming our location, blaming our surroundings, our friends, our circumstances, our upbringing. I mean, we blame Satan for so many things, and he's guilty of a lot of stuff. But if we're honest, there's some sin that takes place in our lives simply because of our sin nature. And so many times we blame everything around us. We blame everything but ourselves and our sin and the very nature that is within us. Look at verse number 2. Now when evening came, David arose from his bed and walked around on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance. Now some people have said that David shouldn't have been sleeping during the day, but again, this is where we have to take things in history historical context, literal context, and grammatical context. Historically, as they still do today, in this part of the world, they sleep during the heat of the day, and David is coming out in the evening, and he's walking out on his roof, more like a little bit of a terrace. And he sees a woman bathing, and we think of a woman being inside of a bathtub, but this is where someone would have lifted up a piece of garment and washed just a leg and washed an arm and maybe removed part of a garment just to wash around an area. This is not a woman inside of a bathtub. But David sees this woman, and he looks at her, and he continues to look at her. Remember, David was the individual that said, God, I want to walk within your house with a pure heart. He said that in Psalm 101, and now he's walking away from that commitment, and he's looking, and he continues to look. This should have been the place where David said to himself, I'm doing something wrong. But he doesn't. Verse number 3, so David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Now these people, they're all in David's inner circle. I mean, he knows each of them. He's got a relationship with each of them. He knows them, and he's known them for years. But I want you to see a word here in this verse. It says that David sent messengers. See, when I was younger, I read this passage of scripture, and I thought David called for his servant, and his servant came over, and David said, who is that? And the servant said, oh, that's Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. But that's not what happened. This word sent means to go out and inquire. So he sent his servant out. The servant went to where Bathsheba was, found out who she was, and then came back. He comes back to David and tells David, hey, this is Bathsheba. And he says it in this way, daughter of Eliam, wife of Uriah the Hittite. And this is where David would have known this is someone's wife. This isn't right. Then David sends the messenger back again to get her, to bring her to himself. You might ask, why is that detail so important? It's so important because David had time to dwell on what he desired. He didn't care about the guardrails. He didn't care about the warnings. He didn't care about what was said from his servant. He didn't care that his chief counselor was the grandfather of Bathsheba. He didn't care that he knew Uriah. He didn't care that he knew Eliam. He didn't care about any of that. David saw what he wanted. He wanted what he wanted, and he was going to get what he wanted. So David's premeditated desire is so great that the boundaries that he was given were completely dismissed. Verse number 4, and David sent messengers. Here's the second sending out, and took her. And when she came to him, he lay with her. And when she was purified of herself from her uncleanness, she returned to her house. And again, we see a time period. David sending the messengers, but this time his mind is made up. David knowingly commits adultery. And here's the interesting thing. He had no intention of a relationship. He sent Bathsheba home like nothing happened until, look at verse number 5. The woman conceived. And she came and she sent and told David and said, I am pregnant. Then David said to Joab, saying, send me Uriah the Hittite. And so Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked concerning the welfare of Joab. He didn't care about Joab and the people and the state of the war. And all of this is completely unnecessary. David would have had a steady flow of this information on a regular basis. Then David said to Uriah, go home to your house, wash your feet. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and a present of the king from the king was sent out after him. But I want you to see what Uriah did. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his Lord, and did not go down to his house. David's servants. Here's the sad, twisted part of all of this. David's servants know what David is trying to accomplish. And so David's servants tell David, hey, Uriah didn't go home last night. And it's interesting to note that David's servants know what he's trying to accomplish. So David calls for Uriah. And he says, why didn't you go home last night? Look at what Uriah says. Uriah said to David, verse number 11, the ark in Israel and Judah are staying in temporary shelters. And my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in open field. Shall I return and go to my house and to eat and drink and to lie with my wife? By your life and the life of your soul, I will not do this thing. So look what David does next. So David tells Uriah to stay with him. Hey, stay with me tonight, and the next day you can go back to the battle. And so that night, David celebrates with Uriah. And David gives him so much wine that he makes Uriah drunk. Hoping that he can make him drunk, send him back home to his wife Bathsheba, that they would then have a relationship, and David could blame the birth of this child on Uriah. But Uriah, even drunk, doesn't go home. Verse number 14, now in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he had written in the letter saying, place Uriah in the front line of the fiercest battle and withdraw from him so that he may be struck down and die. This is a side note. You know what's really interesting, and maybe you might remember this from the series that we did on David? When Saul wanted to kill David, you know what he did? He sent him out on impossible missions and said, hopefully he dies by the hand of the Philistines. Now look what David is doing. David is becoming the thing that he ultimately said he never wanted to become. And what's leading him there? What's making him do this? His pride. And so he sends Uriah with this note in his hand to give to Joab. Joab's going to put him at the front of the battle. Uriah is going to die. All why? Because David and his pride. Look at verse number 17. The men of the city went out and fought against Joab, and some of the people among David's servants fell, and Uriah the Hittite also died. And so there's a messenger coming back to David to give him a report of the soldiers that have died. And whenever they had soldiers that died, they were always nervous that the king was going to be upset because the king didn't want to lose soldiers. And so Joab says to the servant, don't be nervous. When you go back, if David gets upset that soldiers have died, I want you to tell him that Uriah died also.